Hi everyone, Inclusionista Tourista here. So it's the beginning of the second week in Helsinki and got lots going on, school visits, meeting some parents, meeting the Finnish National Education Agency at the end of the week. So I'm hoping by then I'll have lots of really much more informed questions to ask them about what I'm discovering, sadly, is quite a gap between what the law says in Finland in relation to inclusive education and what the reality is for disabled children and young people. Also lots of people talk about the commitment to inclusive education here being more about rhetoric than about good practice. So I had a very busy 3 days last week visiting various organisations, including one that was visually impaired people led, talked to me a lot about the reality of inclusion in Finland, and however much it pains me to say, things here feel much more similar to the UK than I think I'd realised. There is a lot of talk about child's rights, there is a lot of talk about the education system being child focused. I suppose for me, and the conversations that I've had with a number of people, is whether or not that also means inclusive. And in truth, it's more about integration, as we have in the UK. So those children that can fit in relatively easily to the what they call the regular education system here, regular schools, do fit in. But those that don't, and those that struggle with the regular education system, often find themselves, particularly when they get close to 16, sort of moved into the special vocational sector. So in Finland, you have preschool from sort of 6 till 7, and then you have what they call the basic education system, which is 7 to 16. And the law does say that that disabled children should be part of the regular education system, and that in theory they have a right to the support that they need. Depending on who you speak to, that's driven by diagnosis, and some people say no, it's not. It's special needs, they call it here, sadly, is identified by groups of people, but led primarily by teachers and other healthcare professionals get involved in those conversations in terms of what support needs to look like, and parents too, and at least in theory, young people themselves. But it feels pretty messy and pretty inconsistent, and good old postcode lottery is absolutely the case here, and that's really because municipalities and schools, municipalities being what we would call in the UK local authorities, have a huge amount of autonomy. Now on one level that's great, because it gives them the freedom to change and adapt the system that they have, but in truth what it means is that parents and young people can't guarantee a consistency of support in education. And for those young people that require the higher level of support, because there are 3 levels, often find that support isn't available, or that they then have to get into arguments and ultimately legal wrangles with the school and the municipality about what that support needs to be, and then ultimately who's going to pay for it, because again, who's going to pay for it seems to be a complicated process too. So I'm feeling a bit sad, I think, about that my expectations for Finland have been a bit dashed, because whilst there are some great things happening, in that there is for where there are special schools, special vocational schools, there is a legal obligation on those to build the capacity of regular schools, and that in many cases lots of disabled children are moving between the two quite often, and met various disabled people last week who talked about getting support from special education to enable them to be part of mainstream regular school. So that's a good thing. And I had some very interesting conversations last week about the Finnish idea, which they've been talking about for a long time now, of special schools no longer being places of education, but being kind of what I would describe as a community resource for all of the regular schools in their location. And we at Alfie have certainly been talking about that for quite a while. And I remember, and Simone will too, at Alfie, our campaigns person, having a conversation with the Department for Education in London about that very possibility. So I will be pursuing that, and I will be talking quite a lot about that in my report when I get around to write it. So at the moment, I'm sort of feeling a bit mixed about what I'm seeing here and what I'm hearing, and it's very sad for sure to hear parents. I met a great parent on Thursday afternoon who talked about the battle to have a young person in mainstream, both, and that's a contemporary experience. And the day before, I spoke to a parent of a young man, an adult now, who said that struggle was as real 20 years ago as it is now. So that's disappointing, but I suppose on the up, the law is much stronger here. It doesn't talk about, there are no caveats that allow for segregation in quite such an organised way as there is in the UK. The downside is they don't have guidance that allows for the identification of good practice, but there is a plan from a number of organisations here, parent-led and disabled person-led, to create a project for realising inclusive education. That group is the Article 24 group, and I think that really makes me think that we need to do something similar in the UK. So I will also be pursuing that. We've been talking about that at Alfie for a while, about having a cross-cutting, cross-sector working group to think about how we get from the current situation in the UK, which is grim in terms of inclusive education, let's be honest, to one that can think much more creatively and much more practically about how we move from from integration, which is what we've got, and in many cases poor integration, to testing out how we get really good inclusion for all disabled children, not just those children that seem to be able to fit themselves into mainstream as it currently is. Anyway, so it's Monday morning here, and I've got a busy week ahead of me, so I'm looking forward to meeting lots of new people and having my head blown really by what they say is happening here and their hopes for the future. So I'm going to try to do films more regularly this week, but last week it was such a culture shock after 4 months being away from work, actually having to kind of get my work head on and appear at the very least that I know what I'm talking about. Hopefully this week I'm more able to do that. Okay, see you soon.